a new head of school who wasn't Jewish came to the school. And the only time where the school met at the beginning of the day was in the shul. We had davening in the beginning of the day. So the new principal was invited to say a few words at the end of the prayers. And he said, as part of his greeting, the Birkat Kohanim, in English, of course. And the rabbi said afterwards that he was very uncomfortable about that whole scenario of a devout Christian saying the priestly blessing in the synagogue. And it was a very sort of interesting and awkward moment, because when I hear Christian religious leaders quoting Torah with fervor and quoting from the Tanakh with belief, it can be a wonderful, uplifting thing that we share these texts. But there can also be a sense of who's the Cohen? And this is going to be one of our questions today, is who is the Cohen? And what is the Cohen's role in our lives today? And what makes the Kohen entitled to bless us? So these are interesting tensions in the text. But to go back to what I was saying, the Parsha has at the beginning of the Parsha the continuation of the role of the Leviim, of the Kohanim, and it's connected back to the Mishkan. At the end of the Parsha, we have these gifts to the Mishkan, and the lovely story of it, everybody brings the same gift. Every family brings the same gift, which is a message in itself. But in the middle, you have these other themes that seem to be unrelated. And what I struggle with is, well, what is the relationship? And my thinking is this: we are in a very interesting situation in Jewish life at the balance between what we do in our homes and our families and do in our social life and the place of the Mishkan Katan, the synagogue, in our lives. And in the coronavirus, I think I might have mentioned to some of you, many Christian leaders turned to their communities and said, we've got to become more like the Jews now that the churches are closed. We've got to put our religion back into our homes. And many Christian leaders around the world whose churches were closed on Easter said, well, now try and learn from what the Jews do at Pesach. They turn the key religious ceremony is around the table or in the home. And our relationships with one another, our social relationships and our family relationships, and turning the home into our sacred place is absolutely key to Jewish life. But notice how it is bracketed by the Mishkan. The interpersonal relations in this week's Parsha are bracketed by the Mishkan. So it's so we have, in order for our home to be a Mishkan Katan, a small tabernacle or Mikdash Katan, or a small place of worship, in order for our home to be that, we have to have a conception of what the big one is, what the real one is, because you need to work from something, from some model. And I'm going to suggest the following. We talk about heavenly Jerusalem and earthly Jerusalem, a relationship between heavenly Jerusalem and earthly Jerusalem. And what's amazing is the concept is that what we do on earth has repercussions on heaven. And there the relationship is, if you want heavenly Jerusalem to be complete and whole, you have to make earthly Jerusalem peaceful and complete and whole. What we do on earth impacts what happens in heaven. Nevertheless, heavenly Jerusalem serves as a model for what earthly Jerusalem is. So it becomes reciprocal, you might say cyclical. So you have a heavenly Jerusalem which encompasses an earthly Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, we're told, is in and of itself, before we build anything or do anything, it is the place that Hashem planted holiness here. And if humans do absolutely nothing, the ground is still sacred. Similarly, and I'm drawing the parallel because this week's Parsha doesn't deal with it and so many other Parshiot have it, Shabbat. There's a discussion in Jewish life. Is Shabbat holy even if we do nothing? Because God created the seventh day and made it holy? Or is Shabbat holy because of what we do? Because we have a responsibility, the kadshot, to make it holy. And again, you can see it from either side. There is something sacred about Shabbat, but we are still required to make it sacred. So you can say that there is Jerusalem, it is sacred, but we have to make it sacred as well. And then there is the Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem. The Bet HaMikdash was sacred, but we had to make it sacred. And we desecrated it at many times in our history. And when we desecrated it, we lost it because it needs to be kept sacred. And remember, I mentioned to you when we were looking at Parshat Bahar, and we said Parshat Bahar says, if we are not behaving properly in this land, the land will vomit us out, because the sanctity needs sanctity. It needs reciprocity. So now going back to this Parsha, you can see the beginning and the end of the Parsha, which talk about the Mikdash and talk about the role of the Leviim and our relationship with, if you like, the divine through the Leviim. That is encompassing stories about how we relate to each other. And we know that if we don't relate to each other properly, none of that matters. As the prophets say so many times, what need have I of your festivals? Isaiah says this particularly, says God, meaning your festivals. What God doesn't need us for him to be holy, but God wants us to contribute to making him holy. He wants the partnership, and there is a balance between our interpersonal relationships and our relationship with the divine. And just before we start reading, I'll just mention one more source, which I've mentioned before many times in the Telushkin Telushkin, what's his name? Praga, I think it is, the book about Jewish wisdom, where Joseph Telushkin says that he doesn't get so upset if he sees his children fighting with each other. If he sees his children being unpleasant to him, he can deal with it. But if he sees them being unpleasant to each other, it really hurts him. And this is the Divine Father wants us to have the relationship between ourselves. That it hurts him when we don't have a good relationship. And so I think our relationship with God is related to our relationship with one another. Let's look together at the text of the Parsha. I said to you, I don't like teaching because there's so many things in it that I find difficult to look at. It's very long. It's a very long Parsha. So we're really going to skim through parts of it and then come back to particular parts. So it starts off about the family, the sons of Gershon, Gershon being the third son of Levi, of the tribe of Levi, yes, and giving them a special role. And we get other family responsibilities, and the idea that every family in the tribe of Levi had a particular role. And that takes us through basically Rishon and Sheni. We get those particular roles. We are now looking at Shlishi, which is chapter 5. That's where I'm picking up, which is Shlishi. And the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, every mitzorah, and everyone who has an issue and everyone who's unclean by the dead, both male and female, you should put out without the camp. And the children of Israel did so. Now, we've already had this. We had 2 Parshiot where we learned that. So why are we getting it again? The only real reason that we can well, there are two things that we can see. The first one is we now had described in last week's Parsha what is the encampment. Remember, we got a shape of the encampment. We got an order of marching and the way people are going to be. So maybe now it's repeated because it now makes more sense to understand what it means to be outside the encampment, because we have a picture in our minds of what the encampment might have been. So that's one answer. A second answer is, and they did so. In other words, for the first time now, we actually have an episode of needing to put the Metzorah outside the camp. But the third reason, and that I think perhaps the most important, is put it in the context of what's about to follow. So now let's read on. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, when a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit a trespass against the Lord, and that shall be guilty, then they shall confess they have done their sin which they have done, and make a restitution for the guilt in full, and add to it a fifth part thereof, and give it to him in respect of whom he has been guilty. But if the man has no kinsman to whom restitution may be made for the guilt, the retribution for the guilt which is made shall be the Lord's, even the priest's, besides the ram of the atonement, whereby atonement shall be made for him, and everyone shall have an offer. So here we have a number of things in this little, just this tiny little bit. The first thing is, I want to ask you, who in the camp has no relative? No one in the family?
The Gerim?
Yes, only the Gerim. Everybody else comes from a family and has a family. In other words, somebody who is converted, somebody who's joined the group has no family. And I want you to look at what happens there. Then their restitution goes to the Levites. And I want you to think about the idea of this, that somehow that is an elevation. So you've got to, they're sort of, they can never be a Levite. Somebody who converts can never be a Levite, but in a way that becomes their family, their default family as well. So it's quite a nice thing. But now I also want to add another element. So that's one thing that we learn. Another element is that it is not enough to admit your guilt, and it's not enough to bring an offering to the sacrifice, to the temple. You have to deal with the person whom you've wronged. And that is, again, a fantastic lesson. Now, I want to tie it back to the Metzorah. We were told that Zara'at, this word that's translated as leprosy, we've learnt in previous Parshiot that this is to do with Lashon Hara, with the way we speak. And now if we put it in the context of what we have this week, we get a clear message that you have to speak to the person whom you've wronged with your speech as well. This is the message that you may think that it's over with once you've been expelled from the camp, had your period of cleansing, and been allowed to return to the camp. But it follows on. You make retribution and restitution and add a fifth. Well, of course, as we've had over and over again, the eye for the eye, it's not literally, you can't always do literally a fifth. It's the when it's monetary, you can do literally a fifth extra. But when it's when you've offended somebody, it's hard to know, but you've got to bend over backwards to make it right. And this is the first thing that we have in this week's Parsha, which is really about the relationships between people. And let's continue with the text, because it's very long. Verse 11, and the Lord spoke unto Moshe, saying, speak unto the children of Israel and say to them, and here we get my really difficult text, the law of the Sotah. If any man's wife go aside and act unfaithfully against him. Okay, so it starts off, if any man's wife acts unfaithfully against her, the first thing you think of, well, we're not allowed to commit adultery. If any man's wife acts unfaithfully, why do we need to have anything special here? We already know that this is a death penalty. It's a terrible, terrible sin to commit adultery. So why are we getting something else here? Let's move on. and a man lie with her carnally, and it be hid from the eyes of her husband, she being defiled secretly, and there being no witness against her. Aha, now we have a hint at maybe some reason for this coming up here. And that is, we know that in order for the death penalty or even other penalties to be imposed, you have to have witnesses. Now, I don't think there are terribly many people who commit adultery in front of two witnesses. So you could say, I've got my solution here. This is what happens when there are no witnesses. And then you say, just a minute. Isn't there a presumption of innocence when there are no witnesses? This is very complicated. We don't assume that somebody's done something unless there are witnesses. So we need to move on, because it says, verse 14, and the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be defiled. Or if the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she not be defiled. Only when we get to here do we understand that this might all be taking place in the imagination of the husband. The husband is feeling jealous and feels suspicious of his wife, but not because necessarily there's evidence, but because of it's put back on his intense feelings of jealousy. And then it gives this really strange, I'm not going to read all the details of it, this really strange procedure that they have to go through in order to, I would say, prove her innocence. Because if you look at the whole procedure that they have to go to, let's just pick up on verse 19. And the priest shall cause her to swear and say unto the woman, if no man have lain with you and have not gone aside to uncleanliness, being under thy husband, be thou free this water of bitterness that causes the curse. But if you have gone aside, being under thy husband, and if you've defiled with some man and laid, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear with the oath of cursing, and the priest shall say unto the woman, the Lord make a curse and an oath upon thy people, and the Lord does make thy thigh to fall away and their belly to swell, and this water curses. And the woman says, Amen, Amen. Look at the whole, what you need to understand is all of this is being told to the husband and wife, that all of this is going to happen. And then the priest shall write the curses in a scroll, blot them out, make the woman drink the water. I just want you to try and get the picture, and many people have done this. First of all, there are those who say that it was never tested, that it didn't happen. We get this a lot in the Torah, the question of whether it really happened or didn't happen, or this was a threat. But I want you to listen to the process. Husband and wife are standing there together, and the priest goes through these horrible things that will happen to the wife if she is lying. Horrible. And she says, go ahead. What does the husband think if she says, go ahead? Now, if we were doing bibliodrama, we could have some husbands that would say, she's not a believer, perhaps. But the majority of husbands are going to say, I would think, and I think you can agree or disagree, if she's saying go ahead with all those horrible threats, then she must be innocent, because she wouldn't go ahead and allow herself to go through that agony if she were guilty. So one of the answers that is given by the Mefarshim is, you got to this point where the woman said go ahead, and you didn't need to go any further, because if it was motivated by a man's jealousy and he sees his wife saying go ahead, then he's not going to need to go any further. But I want to just assume that it did go further, because the text takes us further, and there are 2 or 3 things we need to note. The first one is that we are allowed to write, the priest is allowed to write God's name on a parchment, and then that name is dissolved. And it's the only time that we're allowed to write God's name and have it dissolved. And again, the Mefarshim say this, they say, such is the importance of Shlom Bayit to God, that he will allow his name to be defiled or erased for the sake of Shalom Bayit. In other words, there is a belief somehow, and this is where it's so complicated for me because I struggle with it, but there's a belief somehow that this whole process was about restoration of Shalom Bayit, of peace in the home. You have a husband who is jealous, and by going through a ceremony of some sort, which demonstrates that there's no reason for his jealousy, it brings peace in the home, and God is prepared to have his name erased for peace in the home. This is the lesson that the Mefarshim use. I see Amanda shaking her head. I'm also, as you see, I struggle with this, but I'll just add the other little bit and then we can talk about it for just 1 second, because at the end of the story is also problematic for me. So we need to talk about it, because it says, this being the Lord and law, and if she, sorry, I didn't read it, because if she is cleared of everything, then after that, their marriage is restored. They're going to have lots of children, and they're all going to live happily ever after, and he can't divorce her. Now, this is a fascinating answer, because he can't divorce her might make her trapped. So what you must understand in this is that all of this must be going on with the woman wanting to keep the marriage, because it's not difficult. You can avoid the whole process by, if a husband accuses his wife of infidelity, the woman can say one of two things: either, yes, it's true, and I don't love you, and let's get divorced, and he'll divorce her. Or you can say, it's not true, but I don't want to be married to you if you feel that way about me. And if he also doesn't want the marriage, he would agree. And if he does want the marriage, and she is saying, divorce me, they wouldn't go through this sotah process, because she would be, she would refuse. She would be saying, I don't want to be proven innocent because I don't want to stay married to him. So the very basis of this whole section is that the husband and wife both really do want to stay together. And this jealousy of the husband is putting a barrier to peace in the home, and we need to solve his jealousy. As I say, I struggle with this. I just want anyone else who would like to make a comment or reflect how you read this, or whether this has any meaning for you. Would anybody like to make a comment?
Peter, I think it's a risky process, isn't it? I hear what you're saying, that the woman has some control because she can say, no, I don't want to go through this process. However, it's about colluding with and playing around with men and their games with women. And women are pawns in this process. So it's a very difficult one. So I understand your difficulty with it. I don't think a straightforward reading of it can make it comfortable for any woman in the 21st century.
I'm going to suggest to you that's not just 21st century, and I've said this before in other commentaries, because if we look clearly, there's a whole section of this in the Talmud, in the Gemara, and clearly the rabbis and others have been concerned about this for ages. They're not. It's put in the category of the great mysterious sections of the Torah, because nobody clearly understands. The only thing that I would say is that it says that one of the issues here is, if the woman dies as a result of this process, then the husband who put her through this is not guilty of doing anything wrong, of her death. And that is, it's really interesting It's a really interesting and very difficult.
Really interesting, because when I read it, I think what they're doing is inducing a miscarriage in case she did sleep with him and she's got the wrong baby, because
that's an interesting literal reading.
Yeah.
Simone.
I feel uncomfortable, because what happens if the results come up that she's guilty, but she's really not guilty?
Well, this is again supposed to be.
That's why I felt uncomfortable when I was reading.
It's supposed to be foolproof, because it's not supposed to be rational. This is supposed to be divine intervention. And again, if she's innocent, it could be that she has still done something wrong, that is, the degradation was deserved in some way, because she's somehow been responsible for her husband's jealousy. And this is where, again, maybe I don't think it's just 21st century women. Peter, say what you...
I see that this mixture, what she drinks, is really not something poisonous. So the natural outcome is that she will survive without any consequences. And only if God intervenes, if there's a divine intervention, then she will die.
Yes.
So
that's the reading, yes.
As a rule, she will come out of it without any negative consequences, and Shalom Bayit is restored, as you said.
It's an interesting one, though, because we all know, of course, the psychological impact. And again, maybe this is really about pushing the barriers of somebody's sense of guilt, and supposed to, if the woman is proclaiming, saying, go ahead, I'm innocent, nothing's going to happen to me, making the husband be scared that something bad could happen as a result of this anyway. So I don't know. It is a very, very difficult one. And the more commentaries you read on this, or that I read on this, the more confused I become. And so I leave myself in the realm of saying, this is like so many other things, like even the cure for tzaraat, or the red heifer, or even kashrut. These are things that don't make sense in the rational world, but could have a huge impact on our psychological world. And it's
comment.
Yes.
Yes. We don't have much record of any of this stuff happening, but there is this story in the New Testament of this woman that we don't know if she had been judged or whatnot, but Jesus comes along and they've got the crowd and the husband there and the wife, and they are going to start stoning her, and he stops them and says, let the person that is totally innocent of any sins cast the first stone. And nobody cast the first stone.
Yeah. Again, it's a powerful idea that it goes back to what I said before about the death penalty, that it couldn't be imposed without witnesses. Well, of course, then there's the whole discussion about what the witness has to have done. There's great reluctance in Jewish life to punish people. We find all sorts of ways, including, of course, atonement, to avoid punishing in terms of punishment that is required towards God. But again, context, what we just read just before this, that if you've financially affected somebody, you have to restore your relationship with them. And now within a family, if you have jealousy brewing up, you have to work out a way to get rid of it and be able to start again. So these are parts of the message. I want to move on to the Nazarite, because this is one of the themes I really want to pick up on with regard to this week's Parsha. partly because all of us have been experiencing a little bit like being a Nazarite in the past few weeks. That is the idea of being cut off from society in some way. And although Amanda's drinking wine to show us that she's not going to be a Nazarite.
Not having a haircut.
Yeah, no, well, we all did that without that for a while. So, but anyway, the interesting thing about the Nazarite is it's somebody who takes a vow, and they seem to take a vow because they want to be more holy. They want to do something additional than the Torah requires of them. And I want to turn to verse 13. And this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his consecration are fulfilled, he shall bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, and he shall present his offering unto the Lord, and it's the lamb without blemish. And it's the question is, why does a Nazarite have to offer an offering when he returns from being a Nazarite, when he has tried to do something good? And the simple answer that many of you will have heard many times is that we don't really approve of Nazarites. We don't really approve of those people who want to take themselves away from society in order to try and be a bit more holy than everyone else. In fact, the true test of our holiness is being able to be holy within society. And Parashat Kedoshim reminded of that. The real ways of being holy are the ways we relate to one another. We're going to come back to this. So I just wanted to draw your attention. And then verse 22. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and his sons, saying, on this way, I'm sorry, my translation is shocking. You shall bless the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, and then we get Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, the priestly blessing. And it seems really strange to have it just tacked on the end of the story of the Nazarite. And, you know, what's it doing tacked on the end of there? And then immediately following that, we have these gifts that I told you about, the offerings that each of the families brought. And as you can see, each of the families brought an offering that was actually the same offering.
Peter?
Yes.
Peter, was the bracha given there because we are all holy and we don't need to be Nazarites? We need to be ourselves and be responsive to what we're asked to do?
Okay, so that's one answer, can be exactly that. But what's really interesting is it's a special role of the Leviim. Now, if you look at a priest, you might think, remember we already learnt when we were first introduced to the concept of a Kohen. We talked about the fact that it was to differentiate yourselves from the Egyptian Kohanim. The Egyptian Kohanim were dealing with the dead. Our Kohanim are not allowed to go near the dead, not allowed to be defiled by the dead. So we had a real distinction between Israelite Kohanim and the Kohanim of Egyptian society. And now we might be offered another difference between our Kohanim and everybody else's Kohanim. Our Kohanim are not allowed to cut themselves off from society, be like Nazarites. Our Kohanim, the first thing they have to do is that they have to bless the children of Israel, be with them, be ministering to the congregation of Israel. And that is the role of the Kohanim. They are funnels or channels of the divine blessing to the people. They can't cut themselves off from the people. They're not a world unto themselves. So I think this juxtaposition is about talking about not allowing the Kohen to see himself as being more virtuous if he's cut off. He can't do his role if he's cut off. So that's the way I read it. If you can turn to the handout, I've taken two articles again this week from the Bar Ilan University site, and one of them about the Nazir, starting off with the Nazir. And I'm just going to jump this very quickly. There's one view of the Nazir which is positive, okay? And when you look at the Hebrew, and I didn't do this properly with you, so we really should do that. Go back to the beginning of chapter 6. And God spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ish or Isha ki yafli lindor neder. Yafli, this word yafli is a really interesting word. If you know the word yafli in modern Hebrew, the word we use all the time is pele. A pele is something wonderful. And you say zenifla. That's lovely, zenifla. I'm sure you've heard both the word pele and nifla in modern Hebrew. So it starts off saying, if he will do something wonderful and make a vow that he should be a Nazir. And that word implies that it's something very positive. So the idea can be a positive idea. Let's read the text. On one hand, there's evidence of a positive attitude towards Nazirs. The Torah begins the reading with the word ki yafli, of uttering a Nazir's vow to set himself apart for the Lord, Simply put, taking on invitations for the sake of God beyond those required by law elevates a person. And by the way, the Parsha is called Naso, elevation. I didn't even mention that. We had it last week as well. The idea that when we're counted, we're elevated. The theme of elevation continues. Some do so in order to distance themselves from transgression, as in the account by Shimon HaTzadik of a shepherd whose vanity was aroused by seeing the reflection of his beautiful ox in a spring, and who consequently decided to take on the vows of a Nazir, applaudably in the opinion of Shimon HaTzadik. So if you are admired greatly and you try and cut yourself off to have less admiration from the public, that could be a good thing. But just as the sages added restrictions to the commandment to make fence around the Torah and safeguard against transgressions, so too an individual is entitled to undertake additional restrictions to safeguard against fear of sinning. And by the way, we do that as a community with many things, including kashrut. We put extra borders around them to make sure that we are able to do the core Torah obligation. So a person who's fearful of sinning is allowed to put some sort of barriers, but you just have to be very, very careful. But the real question, why was the passage on Nazir juxtaposed to the passage on Sotah? To indicate that whoever sees a wayward woman ought to forswear wine, for wine leads to another infidelity. That's one answer, is that these things are all in some sort of continuum, and that the Sotah passage is really a warning against the man who might be what we call it, the third party in all this. In order for a woman to commit adultery, she needs a willing man, and maybe if that willing man is a Nazir, he won't get engaged. So that's one answer. Another positive element in being a Nazir is that it removes a person from the vanities of the world for the sake of spiritual uplifting. And Nachmanides says something about that. But I'm going to jump to viewed negatively. On the other hand, one can also find a negative view of Nazirhood. When listing the offerings that one must be brought, the priest shall say a sin offering. Rabbi Eliezer HaKappah explains his sin is for denying himself wine, for which we conclude that whoever fasts for self-affliction is termed a sinner. I'm top of page 2. That is to say, taking upon oneself additional restrictions beyond those established by the Torah and the sages is not viewed with favor. And I think, again, the wine seems to come up a lot. Of course, the wine wasn't the only thing, but as we're going to see, as we've seen already, it seems to be a major thing here. And I'm going to add what isn't added there. If you have just let me finish. If you've cut yourself off from wine, you are also cutting yourself off from a lot of the sociability in Judaism associated with Kiddush for festivals. But drinking wine without going over the top, except on Purim, is considered a virtue, because allowing yourself to have a certain level of release is seen as positive, not negative. but wine can also allow you to become slack. So wine seems to be a big issue here. Nathaniel, what did you want to say?
Yes, well, it's that the person is cutting himself off and making him feel that he is more sacred than anybody else. And here we are, though, that the basic element of sacred declaring sanctity is wine.
Yes. So this is what I was saying about cutting. It's cutting yourself off with wine is a big thing. I want to jump back to the reading on the composite approach. The Tosafot, the commentators, the French commentators on the Talmud, notes the contradiction, which says that even a Nazir who is pure is considered a sinner, and in another tractate, which implies that a pure Nazir is not termed a sinner. And it reconciles the text as follows. Let's read this together on page 2. Rabbeinu Tam claims that despite the Gemara's assertion that he's not a sinner, that his good deed outweighs his transgression, for it is a commandment to take a Nazir's vow, as the Gemara says, someone who sees a wayward woman should forswear wine. Nevertheless, there's a slight element of sin, just as someone who fasts on Shabbat because of having a bad dream on Friday night. For such a person, on account of his fasting, is delivered from misfortune that must pay the price of not having partaken in the pleasures of Shabbat. What must he do to set things right and be delivered from misfortune? He must fast on a weekday to make up for having fasted on the Shabbat. For the commandment of fasting in the wake of a dream outweighs the transgression of fasting on the Shabbat. And likewise, in the case of the Nazir, a Nazir who is pure is not considered by Rabbi Eliezer so much of a sinner. Now, that might be a complicated parallel for all of us, but in fact, I think there's something quite lovely in the parallel, because we are constantly juggling our personal situation, whatever that might be, with the demands of both the community and our obligations to God. And we all feel at some time or other that we're pulled in multiple directions. And Rambam deals a lot with this, as do other writers of Musar. But let me just tell you that perhaps we can see a connection here between jealousy, as we saw in the case of the Sotah, and jealousy as an emotion, which is a negative emotion, and you don't always have complete control over it, even though, by the way, you shall not covet is connected. It's not exactly the same as jealousy, but it's connected with jealousy. And sometimes you look at something someone else has, and you know you're not allowed to desire it, and you do. And sometimes you want the people who are closest to you to be more attentive of you, and you know it's not fair, and you know they're not wrong, and you can't help feeling that way. So sometimes we have to do things to redirect our inclinations, and we are all different. All of us are different. And sometimes we have to limit ourselves or control ourselves or rein ourselves in different ways. And the conclusion is that the Nazir was usually doing a thing, well, in fact, to be a real Nazir, you're doing something with a good motivation. But the basis of that good motivation was some negative impulse that he wasn't able, he or she, because it does say he or she, that he or she were not able to control without going to some extreme. And this is a very difficult thing. So I do want to read this story on bottom of page 2. Everybody see it? It's about the intertwining of our relationships with each other and with God. And I'm at the bottom of page 2. This conclusion has many implications about which there's not always consensus. For example, consider our patriarch Jacob, who used guile to receive his father's blessing. Commentators justify his act and talk down the negative aspects of it. Rashi, for example. Onkelos says that he acted on the command of his mother, who'd received prophetic direction. Nor do the sages explicitly censure Jacob's action. Yet one homily on the verse, he cried out most loudly and bitterly, says, whoever maintains that the Holy One, blessed be he, is lax in dispensing justice, may his bowels become lax. He's merely long-suffering, but ultimately collects his due. Jacob made Esau break out into a cry once, but where was he punished for it? In Shushan, as it says, Mordechai cried out loudly and bitterly. What we are seeing here is an idea that God is long suffering of our sins, and we have to know that becoming a Nazir, which is self-recognition of something lacking within us, it's a good deed. It might have good motivations, but God isn't going to forgive it unless we apologize for it. We have to know that even doing things for a good motive, if it's the wrong thing, if it's an unusual thing taking us outside society, we have to apologize for it. And there's another text in here which I've jumped over, but there's a lot to say about the topic, but I just want to read you the footnote. One of Rav Kook's followers at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, was a Nazir. He was called the Nazir. You see all his photographs. He doesn't cut his hair and he doesn't drink wine, but he does marry. So, called the Nazir. Okay. The next article that I want to read is on the Bikat Kohanim, and it's dealing with the issue that we've mentioned so many times before. The Kohen is not necessarily superior to us, yet how come he can bless us? And I'm on the bottom of page 3. In his commentary on the verse, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch noted, it is not the priests who bless the people of Israel. Nowhere do the words that they utter have the force of a blessing. Their role is to place the name of God on the people of Israel so that the people of Israel shall be a vehicle for the divine blessing. And it's repeated in Sefer Chinuch, who asked the question, why have the priests, why have the Leviim been chosen for this task? After all, the blessings could have gone directly to Israel. The Sefer Chinuch says, the Lord in his great beneficence wished to bless his people through his servants, who abide constantly in the house of the Lord, whose everyday thought is directed to his worship, whose souls are in awe of him all day, that blessing may come to them by merit. But here we have a problem, because the Kohanim today go to work. They're lawyers and they're thieves. They're members of the Knesset and they're shopkeepers. They're everything. So what makes it might have worked once that the Kohanim spent all day inside the Bet HaMikdash so they could go out and bless the people. But I think that description now is problematic. Let's read on. Malbim took a similar approach, explaining that at times the recipients of the Lord's abundance are not capable of observing this abundance in terms of their degree of spirituality, and therefore the Lord chose to transmit this divine abundance by means of godly people. So again, Malbim is also taking the view, like Sefer Chinuch, that there's something excellent about Kohanim who can do it. But we have to ask the question, and it goes on. I'm jumping a paragraph. Regretfully, the answer is negative. These people aren't different. The priests are no different from the rest of the Jewish people. So we have to ask the question about their ability to bless the congregation nowadays. And the Talmud asks the same question. Isn't that funny? The Talmud asserts, why is it that a person of the people of Israel whom the priest blesses not to say So this so-and-so is involved with illicit sexual relations and bloodshed, yet he blesses me. In other words, even in Talmudic times, there was suspicion against Kohanim who might have been not good. And maybe somebody in the congregation who's being blessed would even know that. And it goes on, it's not so simple. To begin with, we note that the discussion in Jerusalem Talmud actually concerns a priest who's done repentance. Moreover, in the Babylonian Talmud, it says, Rabbi Yochanan said, a priest who has killed another person may not give a priestly blessing. Oh, so some of them were murderers too, but some of them may have been accidental killers. In my opinion, the answer is a function of the controversy over whether we reckon with the reasons for the commandments. Surely those who deduce in scripture, in the Torah, reasons for the commandments would conclude that the inferior condition of the priests today, which does not match their spiritual level as described in Sefer Chinuch Hamardim, affects the very spiritual process of giving the priestly blessing. One solution to this problem, albeit a partial one, can be found in the concluding words of the benediction, when they say, who commands us to bless his people Israel with love. Ba'ahava. This benediction originates in the Gemara. What is the benediction? Rav Zera quoted Rav Hizda, who says, who has sanctified us with the sanctity of Aaron and commanded us to bless his people with love? Whence did the sages derive the imperative that this act being done with love? For it's not explicitly commanded of them. In his commentary on Sadia Gaon Sefer Mitzvot, Perla notes that the Talmud says that the halakha essentially rules that the words, thus shall you bless, means face to face. And this indicates love and affection like the Kruvim. As the Gemara remarks, when the people of Israel obey God's will, the Kruvim will face one another like a man to a woman. If you go back to the blessing, and I'm on verse 22. V'yedaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses to say, Daber la'aron ve'el banav lemor. Ko, and this tavachu et bnei Yisrael amor lehem. Thus shall you bless my children of Israel and say to them. Here the issue is when God speaks to Moses and says, thus you shall bless my people Israel. What is the thus? What is the ko? Thus you shall bless. Is it referring only to the words? The Gemara says, no, it's not only to the words. God is speaking to Moses and he says, and God spoke to Moses, if you like, panim el panim, face to face. He's saying, thus, like this, out of love, the love that I'm giving to you, you have to tell them that's how they have to bless the people. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, I'm on the top of page 5, explained that the priests are like emissaries of the public and that when they give the blessings, it's as if the entire community was standing and directing their hearts towards a state of love. So what this commentary or this explanation does is it makes the words perhaps even less important than the whole process, the whole ceremony. When he says, thus you shall bless the people, it's not just about the words they say, it's about the way they have to say it. And if you like, you know the expression, love conquers all. They are supposed to say it, and here's this, isn't this fantastic thing? Panim el panim, face to face. But what is the key thing when we're receiving the blessing? We don't look at the faces of the Kohanim. And why don't we look at the faces of the Kohanim? Not because we believe in any magic power that's going to have, but we are supposed to somehow feel that we are face to face through the Kohanim. We're channeling to God, that this blessing is coming from God. And now think about it again. The blessing is coming from God. We're not allowed to look to God face to face. If we look, it says, none shall see my face and live. You can't live if you look face to face. So even averting your eyes is emphasizing that this is a divine, godly blessing of love. And the other thing about the blessing is in the way that we read the blessing. I've left the text. I want to go back to the Torah text, when we look at the words, because I just said a moment ago, it's not just the words, it's the way it's given. But it says, the Lord shall bless you and keep you. The Lord shall make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lifts up his face to you and gives you peace. The Lord shines his face upon you. So try and imagine that you're not looking at the faces of Kohanim, but you are not looking at the face of God, because it's the shine, he's shining his face upon you. Remember, you can't look at it. You've got to imagine the light, the shining, and then you've got to look at the word peace, give you peace. And there are 3 things in a row in the Parsha connected with peace. You have Shalom Bayit, and even if we have questions about the way that it is handled here, and we struggle with the message of the Sotah being a message of Shalom Bayit, we have to understand that that is the way it's been understood. So you've got Shalom Bayit, you've got Shalom or the peace of a community, because you are telling people, don't exclude yourself. Find a way of being part of the community and overcoming your negative impulses. So you've got peace of the family, peace of the community as represented by the cinnamon and Nazir who wants to remove himself from community. And finally, a sort of global peace with God being over all of it. And he wants to bring peace to everyone. And again, I think it's really interesting. The words of the blessing itself are very universal. Peace upon it. It doesn't mention the children of Israel until verse 27, where it sums up, so you shall put my name upon the children of Israel and I will bless them. That makes it specific. But when I started this lesson by saying that the rabbi was uncomfortable about a Christian using the shul to utter these words, what we have to, I think, see here is these words are extremely hopeful words in a global setting, that the Lord shall lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Rabbi Yuval Sherlow, speaking about the coronavirus, said something really interesting. He said, I don't think that Jewish people are going to change their liturgy because of the coronavirus. It hasn't been that sort of earth-shattering, because we have changed and added to our liturgy historically over major events. But he said, I think people are going to see the words we say a little bit differently now, because for the first time, it is so evident that what happens in one part of the world affects every other part of the world. There is no escaping the fact that if we sneeze in China, we sneeze in the US and in Israel and everywhere else, that the world, we are so connected, and we can't just ask for a blessing on us, because that doesn't make any sense. A blessing on us requires us to see ourselves connected to the rest of the world. And Rabbi Sholo said that he thinks that that's a new awareness of the way that people are saying their prayers now, particularly prayers. He was speaking particularly of prayers for peace, asking God to bring peace on us, knowing that peace, which is much broader, and I've just said it, it means Shalom Bayit, peace in the family, it means peace in the community, it means peace between nations, but God here, it's something much even bigger than that, that in order for anyone to have peace, everyone has to have peace. And peace isn't, again, I want to emphasize, not just about absence of war. Peace is shalom, shlemut, it includes health. That's part of the picture of peace. And we can't see ourselves as isolated. So I think that it's really you can see a link between these 3 sections of the Parsha. And as I said, as we opened, they are bracketed by references to the Mishkan, but we've got the shul and the home, if you like, the ritual and the social intertwined with each other. So now an opportunity for any reflections, thoughts.
Yes, I have probably 100 Bibles, and I really am going to have to check out this because I think that in many English translations, they want to use the helping verb may. May the Lord bless thee and keep thee.
Mhm.
And so actually that is an incorrect reading, then you're saying.
No, I'm not saying it's an alternative. There's no incorrect, well, I should say there probably are some incorrect readings, but there are multiple ways of reading. And I don't have any problem with saying, may the Lord bless you. If you look at the Hebrew, Yivarechecha Hashem, it says the Lord will bless you. The Lord will bless you. It's in the future tense, and it doesn't have a vav, but then it says,
Yes, but
V'yishmerech.
that's this problem we have with the in biblical Hebrew of the future
Exactly.
being.
Exactly. So may is perfectly acceptable. Did anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? So Netta, know what was your second question or comment? You said you had.
No, just it was just this issue of is it proper to use the helping verb in
Absolutely.
the English translation? Yes,
it is. It's a legitimate way of reading. So this parsha is read this coming Shabbat in Israel. The rest of the world is going to have to wait another week because of second day Shavuot, and I'm of the view that we can easily and should easily adjust our readings to get back in sync with each other, because it matters so much nowadays, but it's not going to happen this week. Tomorrow.
When will it happen? Do you know?
I'm sorry?
When will we be in sync again?
Yeah, not till the end of Sefer. I think not till the end of Sefer Bamidbar.
Oh.
Okay, I'll have to check it. I haven't checked, but I think not till the end. But we've had a lot of it this last couple of years, a lot of difference. Tomorrow at this time, I'm going to go through Sefer Ruth. Again, I was looking at it over Shabbat. Most marvelous book to go through, and we will all be reading that on Friday. And so that's something we have in common. And then the following week, I said to you that we would talk about it. I am happy on Sunday. I'm just looking at the date. Sunday the 31st. I'm happy to continue on Sunday the 31st with just continuing with Parsha. So if you're happy to keep coming back, I see from Simon that she'll be back. Okay, so I'll send out an email. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is I'm teaching tomorrow. Then on Tuesday, I will send an email. I'm actually teaching for the Sydney Jewish community. However, because it's on Zoom, everybody could join, and it's going to
not
be
advertised anywhere, Peter. I haven't seen. I've got lots of things about what's going on. I have not seen any advertising. Can you send us the details?
I will send you the details.
It's through Mizrahi amongst other groups.
Yeah.
So Peter's going to our school. So Peter's speaking for Mizrahi. I'm speaking to New Zealand. You're speaking
I'm
for
speaking to the whole of Australia.
MCJ.
And some Israelis as well. But
Anyway, what I'll do is I'll include mine in
sorry, Peter, hold on. Mandy, when's yours being done?
It's going out on YouTube tomorrow for New Zealand.
Are they having a time when they're showing it?
No, it'll just be on YouTube. So I'll send you the link, Peter, if you want, and then you can.
Okay.
Lovely.
So
mine is on Wednesday. So if anyone wants to come to mine, they can come to mine. You can share that with this group if you want to, Peter.
Sure. So I will. So mine's on Tuesday at the whole event is I think 7 till 9, no 6 till 9 Australia time. So it's 11 till or 6:30, 11:30 till whatever it is Israel time on Tuesday. And
on Wednesday.
No,
Aren't you Wednesday?
Tuesday. Yes, the men are Wednesday.
Men are Wednesday.
And Rachel Frank, why I wanted to mention it, this is really what I want to mention. Rachel Frankel is the keynote speaker. She's speaking in the middle of.
Just at the very end of a shiur, so I'm just going to leave the
she's speaking in the middle of that night, and I think she's somebody really worth listening to. So I would highly recommend, even if you don't want to hear the rest of the event. So I'll send that program out to you. Any other comments or questions anybody would like to say?
I have.
Co-op with handling a difficult parsha. You did
Sorry,
very well.
Rachel, I couldn't hear you. Sorry, Rachel, say it again.
Yersha Koach with your handling of this parsha, which you said was difficult. You really pulled it together very well. And with
Thanks very much.
thank you.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag
Chag
Sameach.
Sameach, everyone. Yes. All the very best, and I'll send you an email in a few moments.
I do have a
Lovely to
question.
learn with you all. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I do have a question about translations. Now, you taught us that Moses Mendelssohn was the making the first German Jewish Bible translation. What was the situation in Britain? In America, it was Isaac Leeser. But what about Britain? When do you have your first Jewish Bible?
That's a very, I don't know. I'll have to check it. It's a very interesting question. I mean, I have old translations myself, but I'm not.
Sonsino.
Yes, exactly. That's what
Is Hertz the translator of the Sonsino?
Yes, that's what I'm holding, the Hertz.
Well, Hertz, that's very late, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So I'm not sure when, I'm just, maybe it might even have something about the translation here. No, this one refers to the American Jewish translation, believe it or not. It refers to the American Jewish translation.
Wait, what does that mean?
It means that it may not have been that the English community was early or keen to do English translations. It may be that the English community itself, look, if you remember,
the American community has Isaac Leeser.
yes, but the English community, a big part of it was Sephardi, and may not have been so interested in reading the Torah in English. I don't know. I'll have to have a look what the first English translations were. I don't know the answer. Okay, and I better end the recording now. Okay, all the very best. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.